Hello, my name is Aaron Cavanagh and I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Post-Burnout.com. Post-Burnout.com is a culture website dedicated to venerating burnt-out artists the world over. This is our website's podcast where we publish full-length recordings of our interviews, which are sometimes the unedited versions of our site's articles and at other times are exclusives. If you're a returning listener, thank you for coming back, and if this is your first time listening, thank you for checking us out. We hope you enjoy and consider subscribing, giving the episodes a thumbs up if you're on YouTube, or giving it a rating if you're anywhere else. It really helps us out. Thank you. Alright, in this edition of Post-Burnout.com interviews, the Irish alt-pop artist Mr Billy Fitzgerald returns to discuss his debut album, A Grand Romantic Gesture, which was released today, the decade-long journey to get it finished, mastering the album at Abbey Road Studios, his plans for a second record, and much more. Also in this interview, Billy mentions a headlining show at Whelan's on April 1st. I'm not sure if that's been announced yet, but I didn't see any information on social media accounts or on Whelan's website about the gig. Otherwise, I would have put a ticket link in the description of this episode. But stay tuned to Billy's social media accounts to hear more about his upcoming shows.
Recording in progress.
Hey Billy, how's it going?
Hello, Aaron. How are you?
It's been a while, I guess. I think June, right? Would that be correct? I think it was when
Uh,
Give Me Love came out.
yeah, around then, I bumped into you at our show, which was June or July or something like that.
I can't believe
Yeah.
it's that long ago. I mean, all the days are just kind of bleeding
I
together.
yeah, I don't really understand the passage of time anymore, especially when you're trying to do a big project like this as well. Like, it's like, okay, I've got 6 months to plan
Yeah.
this stuff. Oh God, it's next week.
No, I
How are
mean,
you? Are you well?
I've been fine. It's nice to meet up again. I guess, yeah, I guess that can be a good starting point. Is how is your 2024 now that we're into the new year?
When I look back at
Yeah,
2024,
yeah, yeah. When you reminisce.
I I there's a really, really funny thing where I decided that I've been putting several things off for several years, personal stuff and the album and things. And for some reason, I decided to do absolutely everything in one year,
Yeah.
and I'm paying for it now. Like procrastination is a terrible thing when you actually get round to doing things. It's like,
Yeah, I was wondering actually because I've talked about this before, and I'd like to get your opinion on it. But when it comes to like procrastination, I think every artist, every creative has a tendency towards procrastination, and I think it's and my theory is that in your head you have this kind of like grand vision of like some artistic kind of tone you can make that's going to be really cool and interesting, and then when you actually try to make it, when you start trying to craft it, confidence kind of shakes a little bit in terms of like you kind of want it to be this almost biblical thing where
yeah,
then you kind of like doubt like your own capabilities. I don't know if that's if you relate to that.
yeah. I think we can all relate to that. I don't know. I remember I'm a designer in my day job, and I learned a lot from a guy I worked with a few years ago about procrastination is like it's just a fact. I know there's a lot of stuff, especially in my Instagram feed, telling me that procrastination is a sign of blah. It's a
Yeah.
sign of not being masculine enough and all this sort of stuff. Well, social media is wonderful, isn't it? So I don't know the actual facts about procrastination, but I know I made my peace with it a few years ago, going like, oh, it's actually everybody, especially in creative kind of things, like suffers from this or ends up procrastinating so much that you just have to work with it. And he
Mm.
did this wonderful thing. There's a guy who like he would be writing blog posts or something like that, and he could never get them done to the last possible second. So what he used to do is just arrange a thing every week where he would have to do a talk on the subject that he wanted to write the blog post about. We'd arrange it for 1 o'clock on Friday. No matter what would happen, there'd be a few people around to attend his talk. And at 1 o'clock on Friday, he might have finished it 30 seconds before, but he would have all of his thoughts arranged in order. And
Yeah.
then he would record the thing, and that was basically the blog post. And it was something I learned about is like, yeah, if you set these immovable deadlines, things get fucking done. And
Oh, absolutely,
I
absolutely.
think that's the thing is that I don't know if you find this, but I've been scolding myself for procrastinating for my entire life. And some of that is your parents kind of going, "Will you not get around to this thing?
Yeah.
Your leaving cert is coming up. Will you not start studying at some point?" All of that stuff. But I always find it's like, oh, right, everybody does this. Everybody who talks about you shouldn't procrastinate is somebody who has just been procrastinating for ages and has learned to give out to other people about it instead of doing it themselves. But I find that if you work with it and you just accept it, it's like stuff gets done. And when you look back, it's like, have I not have I done nothing my entire life because I've been procrastinating? No, I do loads and loads of stuff, and all the big projects get done in some way. I think the other part of what you're saying though is perfectionism as well. Mixing that into there, it's like, well, it can never be good enough. Therefore, I
Yeah,
always think they're two separate things, but they often hit at the same time. And you know,
I think what you're talking about actually about those kind of immovable deadlines actually kind of knocks both of those, it kind of kills two birds with one stone because like yeah, I think that kind of perfectionist route when you have kind of something that can sit indefinitely, it will because you're always just gonna it's kind of like Brian Wilson, remember like where he was trying to find like the perfect like
oh
pop
God,
record and he kind of
yeah.
like really had like some trouble with that, like mental health trouble with that. And I
After making the perfect pop record, he
yeah,
decided to go
after
and
Pet
make the
Sounds.
perfect pop record. It's like, dude, you've done it. It's okay. And then he spends what 40 years like
Yeah,
working on
I
it. And
wonder
it's
if
like,
we'll ever like hear any of that,
well,
or if it'll just be kind of like,
there's like two versions of Smile. It's Smile, isn't it? There's two or
yeah,
Smiley Smile or whatever. There's two versions of it that
yeah.
exist, or three versions of it that exist. And it's like, yeah, like we can see all the constituent elements, and it's pretty good. But that's not to be
But to
too.
be a dick, it would be funny just to give it like 3 out of 5 or something, just
Yeah,
for the fun
exactly.
of
It's good. Yeah.
it. Good
I
background noise.
but I actually like I didn't mean to segue into that, but like that was actually how I ended up getting my album finished after 10 years of working sporadically on it. Was
Yeah.
I literally it hit me. I was out for a walk with the dog during the summer, and I was like, okay, I know I want to release the I for some reason I wanted to release the album in October last year. And I was like,
Hmm.
well, in order to get that done, and I figured out on this dog walk that that would be impossible, but it also hit me that, oh, if I had an immovable deadline, like say if I booked in the mastering in
Hmm.
person in a very expensive and hard to get to place, it's like I know whatever happens if it kills me the week before, it's gonna be done. And that was actually what made the album was I booked in the mastering in Abbey Road, and it's just like, right, it's happening on whatever, the 1st of October. It's booked, it's happening. And no motivator could have been stronger. It was like,
Yeah.
even though I'd done this to myself, I was just like, well, it can't move it. The flights are booked. Everything is happening. And there's a thing, I don't know, there's a great quote from your man who produces Saturday Night Live, the Lauren Michaels.
Lauren Michaels, yeah.
He's got a series of great quotes that I always end up using in design stuff to tell people. But and his one is the show doesn't go on because it's ready, it goes on because it's 11:30. And I
Yeah.
think it's like it encapsulates absolutely everything. It's like you are going to keep working till 11:29, but it's going on. And whenever you can let that slide, whenever somebody goes, okay, we'll leave it an hour,
Yeah.
you're screwed. All the creative energy goes out of it. So I always find like if you have the immovable thing, it's actually going to be as good as it could ever have been by that time. There's no mystical a month later. If I had another month, it would be great. It's like
Yeah.
no, it'd be 0.001% better.
We're all in search of lost time.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's interesting that like you were kind of mentioned that you've been sort of working on this for like a
Mm,
decade because like I don't know, I mean how much kind of like has the project kind of shifted just through the sands of time? I mean because like when I was listening to the record and the big theme seems to be kind of like well obviously I mean going by the name a grand romantic gesture. I mean, that does seem to be like love songs and kind of reflecting on relationships seems to be kind of like the
mm.
the kind of obvious through line between the songs. I was wondering, did new loves come? Did they influence any new songs or anything like that during that period?
I think that's really interesting because I think I wrote everything in a period of about 2 years. I think the whole album and all the songs that didn't make the album were all written in a period of about 2 years. And most of them are written in probably about 6 months, I'd say.
Mm.
And that was no, there weren't any. That was all reflecting back on things because it's like that's probably the period was between me moving in with my girlfriend and me, yeah, and us getting engaged. I think that would have been me writing everything. So don't read too much into that.
Yeah.
But I often find because I it was only when we were actually looking at the artwork and things like that that I started to see the themes emerge because I had to zoom out a little. Like
Mhm.
you're working with a designer, you're working with a photographer. You actually have to start communicating what it's all about in an
Yeah.
artistic way. And I think that's when I zoomed out and was like, that's interesting. They're all about breaking up with people. I was like talking to my wife about this, and she's like, yeah, yeah. it's great, like I've stopped being worried about that a long time ago, but know, but it's what I often find though is like a lot of my songs come out of some true feeling or hang on.
No worries.
A courier at the door. Can you give me 1 second?
Absolutely,
I'm sorry.
absolutely.
Hilariously, the test pressings for my album have just
Oh,
arrived.
nice. I thought you were getting like a courier or something.
Yeah. Well, this is
Just
this
getting
is
like
the
Deliveroo.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Just yeah, and I'll just start eating that. I'll
I
get
didn't
closer to
expect
the
the
camera.
interview to be this long.
Yeah, it's like Jesus. That's hilarious. I've been waiting for them for 7 months. So that's great. Yeah,
That's
can you
actually
just
another thing too.
give
Like
me
I've
40
heard.
minutes? I'm just gonna have a listen.
That's the
Sorry.
thing I've heard before, like, how kind of like artists who are waiting on vinyl, sometimes like the actual shipment kind of dictates the release date of the
It
album.
does. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had to work back. I had to work. The guys I went with were people that were recommended by friends of mine, and I had to find out the rough length of time. And then working with a publicity guy, and we're kind of looking at where are the gaps in his calendar, where are the gaps in my calendar. And I remember it's coming close to Valentine's Day, and it's like that's cool. It's in the Valentine's period. That kind of works for the stuff. But it's also I didn't want it to drift too far into this year without actually putting it out there. And what we were talking about, yeah, what the songs are about. Sorry
Yeah.
to go back to that, but yeah, there was this thing where I figured out that most of my songs they start off with a little moment of like a feeling or something that really happened, and then I end up extrapolating out a story from there. And sometimes it's a real story, and sometimes it's completely made up, or it's me putting myself in somebody else's shoes or something. But it's interesting that this whole album is a breakup kind of album because that's I thought that was very interesting because I don't sit down and go, I'm going to write about this or that or the other thing. I always find it very odd that artists, especially now, seem to know exactly what their song is about and it's a story about something. And I always find that very, very weird because I've never been able to. I sometimes don't know what my songs are about until a year after I write them. I'm like
Mhm.
listening to them going, oh, it's about that. Because
Yeah.
often the words or the mood of it is coming from kind of fairly subconscious kind of thing. It's kind of all trips out. So I find it a little bit hard to kind of see what the songs are about. And then, you're explaining to somebody and you're going, yeah, it's very, very sad.
Do you think actually kind of like putting it down to record and then like listening to it back later actually kind of gives you more of a sort of third person perspective, or do you think it's always just you're always going to be looking at it from a first person perspective?
I don't know. There's a funny one with this, and I've made one album before with my band, and it's like that was all so rushed that I never got a moment in the middle of it to kind of figure it all out. But this time it's a little bit like in 2024 it was spaced out enough, but enough stuff was happening that uh, the stuff was finished, and I had to give direction to a photographer. I had to, myself and my designer were working on stuff, and I found that I had to get distance to see what things were about. But in describing it to the photographer, I think it was a moment there where I was describing it and I described something, it was going to be called something else. And I described it as a grand romantic gesture. And I went, oh, that's the name of the album. That should be, it was literally in writing the brief or writing an email to
Yeah.
the thing. And what was cool about that was that I was doing that before doing the final mixes and final recordings on Gimme Love actually,
Hmm.
and I went into recording Give Me Love with loads of confidence because I suddenly knew the whole theme of the album and I knew the visuals of the album. Suddenly the color and all that sort of stuff was there. And I like the amount of confidence it gave me. And then when I was finishing in August and September, I was finishing all the mixes. And I was so confident about it, not because of the music, but because the whole thing felt like a thing now.
Hmm.
And I found that hilarious that it was not the making of the songs or the studio or sitting at a piano or something. It was actually describing to somebody else what I wanted. So it was very, very useful. And that taught me a lot. Like I can't
Yeah.
wait to see what happens next time. Is this that help again?
It makes press a lot easier to kind of know
I
what
don't,
you're talking
well,
about.
do you ever see, I mean, yeah, like we can say what we want about Radiohead at the moment, but
Sure,
there's an
sure.
interesting thing that Radiohead do, where it's like their last few albums they make it, and the artist is there in the studio
Hmm.
sometimes, or in the building working on the artwork, and it cross pollinates, and I think that's a
Yeah.
really interesting thing because especially with digital music, the visual, in some ways, the visual has gone away, the thing you hold in your hand. But in other ways, the social media aspect of it, the visuals are all, way stronger than they used to be. So
Hmm.
I think there's a really important visual element to that, that it makes sense that that would help you make sense of the music. I think. If that's not way too off the point there, Aaron, I feel like I can keep talking about
No, absolutely.
that.
I think what's really interesting too is kind of what you mentioned there about the teams. I hope I don't see sow seeds of doubt here a little bit, but I
Uh-oh.
remember years ago when I was in college, I was working with a friend of mine. This is a weird thing, but it kind of what you were saying kind of remind me of. And he was making a short film, and he was auditioning actors, and he was kind of describe. I was helping do the camera work, so just for the auditions, I was helping film,
Yeah.
and he was given directions to the actors of what the kind of character they were auditioning, what they were about. And then kind of halfway through it, he changed. And I was like, why'd you change? And he's like, yeah, I realized as I was talking, I was kind of describing the character wrong and his motivations wrong. So I kind of realized, he kind of realized just during the process of auditioning people that the character was actually a different thing than what he was
Yeah.
initially thought it was. Do you ever feel like that? Do you kind of like go, did I make sure I got the team right the first time or
Well, that I think that's the really interesting part, and it's similar to playing gigs as well. It's like if you can rehearse. I think you've been in bands as well. Like so,
yeah.
it's like no matter how many times you rehearse it, playing it live always does something to the song to make it actually. Oh, that's what it needs to be. That energy or something like that.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
a good
totally.
gig anyway. But yeah, I think it is that thing of like when you're forced to. It's like the deadline as well. When you're forced to actually articulate what you want it to be, you start hearing like you yourself describe it, and sometimes you can hear, oh, that's wrong, that
Mhm.
doesn't tally. But I think in terms of themes and stuff, like all the songs were written. uh, I didn't really change much after kind of figuring out that it was all a theme, because when I set out on this, I wanted to make a really good album, and I didn't give myself any. I gave myself loads of musical parameters, but I didn't give myself any thematic kind of thing to it. I think I probably would do that if I was doing it again. But what was cool was that the themes or whatever came from me and writing the songs, rather than, so it came kind of bottom up, rather than deciding I'm going to write a breakup album, or I'm going to write an album
Mhm.
about how terrible I am at
Which I think that
navigating
most
relationships.
art is. That's how kind of
Yeah,
like you make a songbook and you're like, oh shit, I guess that's the kind of
yeah.
connected through line.
And I think there's a thing, I'm quite negative on some aspects of how music is promoted now, because I think there's a lot of, especially in my feeds anyway, it's like it's all about productizing things, and I get the ideas of brand and things like that, like because I work in those kinds of areas, and I think they're correct in a lot of ways, but it's a lot of it is thought about as a product. So it's like, what will it be? Well, it has to be what's popular now, or what people resonate with is emotional songs, or this or that or the other thing. And I find that a lot of people write to order like that, like, or you get a sense that people are, I better write honest songs, or I better write this or that or the other thing. And I hope that people aren't like that. That's just a kind of cynical thing that I'm hearing of other people, because I always find like I've no idea whether I'm in step with anything. I always just feel like as long as it feels accurate to how I feel and I really like the thing, then it's a song by me and it's relevant to what I'm doing. And it's kind of cool that there was a bit of an arc through all the songs, or
Yeah.
like a bit of thematic stuff. But I'd rather it randomly come out through writing than decide at the start and then, write to order or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I think that's a much more organic approach. Yeah, one thing I had a brief flourish in advertising. I worked as a video editor for a production company and as an intern. But one thing I kind of learned from my very short spell was that advertising agencies always prop themselves up as being like revolutionary thinkers and kind of like really outside the box. Like they talk like
yeah.
they're Vladimir Lenin or something, and then
Mm,
but they're like really conservative and very actually when it comes down to creating an advertisement, they're actually very afraid to kind of go out of step
yeah.
when it actually comes down to it. I mean, I think it's funny. I think the kind of idea of advertisers being kind of iconoclastic, sort of irreverent different sort of
Mm.
new thinkers is actually kind of kind of a conservative, true and tested kind of approach almost.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's the thing though, like there's always one in in a year that does something interesting, and then
Mm,
everybody flocks to follow them, and then somebody does
yeah,
something else interesting. But I remember like years ago starting to record music and starting to make music and kind of believing there was a right way to do everything. There was a right way to record, or there was a correct way of producing or something. And I was convinced that there was just like people know this stuff. So you hire somebody and they just bring the production, or they bring the thing, like there's a good sound for drums or something like that. And I think I spent 10 years, like, and like from 16 to whatever, like thinking there is a right way to do everything. And I just have to find the people that do it. And it never occurred to me that for some reason that like anybody who tells you there's a right or a wrong way to do it is wrong. Like
yeah,
it's all just what works. What do you want? What's the best you can get out of what you have? What are you aiming for? It's like it's all different. And like if you listen to like, so Mac DeMarco makes like all that really lo-fi kind of
yeah.
stuff, and it objectively sounds terrible, like on one level, but it sounds absolutely cool because it's like it doesn't sound like anybody else. But also, he's just kind of like making an album in a day in his apartment with one
Yeah.
4 track or something, and it's like it's so cool and it's so interesting, instead of there being like, well, like you're not allowed to release that now because it doesn't, have the stamp of approval from the, drum sound people. And
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. Like there's a conservatism. You see it on YouTube a lot, that you just get, this is how to make great sounding drums. This is how to play guitar properly. This is how to write a great song. And it's like, no, none of these. I mean, these are fine. Everybody has opinions, and that's actually really cool to listen to them. So,
Yeah.
but I really hate the idea of me as a young songwriter used to think, oh, I'm not doing it right. And yet
Right.
my song, like I better write songs like this, or, because I used to fall for that sort of stuff the whole time. I just thought like, oh, I'm not doing it right. What's the right way? What's the right pedal to buy to
Yeah.
sound like that? And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
instead of having the confidence to go, that's how I want it to sound, or
Yeah.
whatever. And I think that's the thing for an advertising firm, like you're saying, like they're actually in that position of, oh, you're being hired, and
Yeah.
nobody gets fired for delivering the conservative pretty good.
Yeah.
But if you aim for greatness, you'll often, like, 90% of the time you're gonna fail. So it's like if it's a commercial thing. Oh yeah. I've got a
Well, I
friend who
think
works in advertising, and it's like it does, yeah, it sounds very creative in small doses, but the rest
yeah.
of it is just, yeah, meet the
No, I mean,
deadline. So
I think that's a huge problem. Actually, it's interesting because recently David Lynch passed away, and I was thinking of
oh,
years ago when the PlayStation 3 was coming out, Sony hired him to do some ads, and he just, do you know the ad I'm talking about, where it's just like it was like a doll baby crying, looking at the PlayStation as if it was like the thing from 2001 or something.
oh
It was
my
just this
God.
really weird abstract, and I think if you have enough kind of clout and you have enough kind of like respect like that, you can probably get away with things. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
I definitely think advertising is not the best place to go if you want to create your if you want to flex your creative arm, let's say.
Yeah.
Also, I was thinking actually kind of like recently about the kind of cross-pollination of kind of how kind of good art that stands out really kind of like reflects in kind of pop culture. I mean, it was interesting last year when Charlie XCX released Brat, and
Mhm.
that aesthetic that was very unique and kind of like minimalistic, and had this kind of off-putting green, kind of garish green color, and just like the word Brat in lowercase, and it was very simple design that became like a huge aesthetic. I mean, I think that kind of goes back to what you're saying, where it's like
Mm.
someone tries something a bit different and it works for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And but then I also think, and this is just probably the cynic in me, but I wonder like how many people does that kind of like artistic style actually appeal to, and how many people are just kind of like going along because that's what we're told is in vogue and what's cool, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's like fashion though. It's like I think we're still in a regurgitatory kind of few decades here where we're just eating our
Yeah,
past a little bit.
totally.
Now every decade does that. I remember in like the when I was in school, it was all 70s clothes
Yeah.
that you buy from the charity shop, and like it was kind of like that was what was cool and, or, quote unquote original. But like, if you were the one person who was wearing that in class, it's like, what the fuck is this guy dressed like? Whereas like there's safety in numbers, I think, of those things. But I also like, I think we have a tendency to think like people are sheep, or like
Yeah.
generally there's people who follow and then there's a few leaders, whatever. But I always find the majority of people, it's more confidence about feeling like you can be wrong, or like that you're
Mhm.
you're allowed to do something and fail, or whatever like that. And some people have the confidence. You ever see like the kids of celebrities are always dressed crazily. They're all like, and
Yeah.
it's not just money, it's like because they have the confidence they can do whatever the fuck they want. They can do, like they're not going to be poor tomorrow. They're not going to
Yeah.
be, like they're always going to, they've got all this confidence out ahead of them. They're always going to be okay.
Yeah.
So they can dress how they want. And it's like, I've got a friend whose kids are kind of like gender non-conforming, and it's like
Mhm.
they struggle, like they're supported, and they're kind of like they're they can be themselves, dress however they want to dress, but you still find the people picking on them for like, why
Yeah.
you dress like that. And I think that's the thing, is that like most people can get on board with things, or it can be weird. I think most people are kind of weird,
Yeah.
and it's just about expressing that. And but I often find the cynic in me as well is like, oh, just people like the Charlie XCX thing, just kind of like, that's a really good example, because it's quite different. It's not that derivative. It's quite a bold thing, and yet it blew up. I'd never heard of that album before. Like, 2 weeks later, it was
Yeah.
every meme was that. I was like, what's going on? So, I heard the wave before, hearing what caused it or whatever, and it's like, I find that yeah, like people get on board with things because it's comfortable to get on board with things. But I also think people are a lot smarter and have a lot better taste than we,
Yeah.
cynically, I assume they don't. And that's why everyone's going to buy my album.
If you have good taste, buy the
Yeah,
new album.
I hope that's coming across.
Well, no, I think that kind of like perfunctory nature too is
Yeah,
sort of something people are savvy to, because like you see like corporations and politicians kind of hopping on meme trends, for example, and they're almost immediately called out. Where it's like
yeah,
I remember years ago, like this is probably back in, I want to say 2020, 2021. When I was in college, I did a report on advertising companies using meme culture, like the organic meme culture, to try and
yeah,
advertise their product. And I was looking specifically at, and to be fair, both of these places have kind of calmed down on doing this, but at the time, Netflix and Channel 4 in particular, every time there was like a new meme trend, they would always somehow like
yeah,
crowbar in to advertise their new show or whatever, and it was always like really embarrassing. And I remember interviewing
yeah.
like a bunch of different people, and I was like, "Does this actually work for you?" And like the consensus was like, "No." I think one person was kind of like okay with it, but I think everyone else was like, "This is awful." So I think people are kind
Yeah.
of like, I do agree. I think like the idea that like you like Charlie XCX's Brat album, and then like some Republican senator goes, "Oh yeah, I'm Brat" or whatever.
Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
gonna
Yeah,
work.
yeah. I think it's really, what's really interesting for me in trying to do this stuff is like, I remember when I started off the album, one of the things was taking a year off music altogether before I knew I wanted to do it. But it's like I need to take time to just think. But one of the things was to be a fan of music again, and I realized like been kind of listening to random stuff and hadn't been checking out as much new stuff or going as deep into certain things as I wanted to. And the brilliant thing was I started just listening to a hell of a lot of different music, and you're
Mhm.
finding it's not all the newest stuff in the world, but you're finding yourself drawn to certain things. But interestingly, for the first time since I was like a teenager, when I was listening to music like that, I found myself wanting to belong to the club. I think it was like Miracle Fortress and bands like that. I was like, oh yeah, I could get a synth and I could be playing that kind of stuff, and I really like it.
Yeah.
And I remember for about 6 months, I was like, I'm going to make music like that. And I was looking at loads of different music that had a kind of a dreamy synth poppy thing with mixed with a more kind of like live band thing. And I'm so glad that I didn't embark on it. I'm going to sound like that, because that music
Yeah.
was gone within a year. Like
Yeah.
that kind of stuff where there was, it was a whole genre that people liked, and then it was like replaced by other genres, kind of thing. But like, I think that's interesting. That I think it's within all of us as well. Like sometimes you just want to belong to the that club over there. It sounds like a fun place to be.
Yeah.
Like it's like, yeah, that's cool.
Uh,
And then other people look at that and probably go, oh, fucking hell, no, this is shit.
Do you think actually, because sometimes when I'm like listening to music, one thing I think about is actually what instruments am I actually hearing? Like like how complex is the bass line?
Mm,
How doable basically is this? Like, if I were
yeah,
to stand up in a nightclub or something like that and try play this music, could I emulate this or could I not? And
yeah.
that sort of thing. I don't know if that ever like affects you as a listener, where you're kind of just thinking about the actual, the pragmatic aspect of actually, if you were to craft this song that you're
Could you
listening to,
do it?
how would you
Yeah.
do it? Yeah.
I think there's a I found being in a band before, especially being in a band before. So if you're in your guitar, bass, and drums band, you go along and see a lot of bands who are guitar, bass, and drums, or maybe they're adding a bit of extra stuff. I couldn't enjoy gigs anymore because every gig I was going to was I was only thinking about that. I was only thinking about how would I do that? How would I do? What are they doing with the amp? That's interesting. I remember being at a Kathy Davy gig and it was an amazing. It was when she released the Tales of Silver Sleeve, that really cool second album for hers. And I think she had your man from Villagers was her band. Like it was her like maybe he was the lead guitarist or whatever. And I was in Whelan's and I was like right beside the stage and I just kind of like I remember taking a picture of or like mentally taking a note of all the pedals he had
Yeah.
because I was like, because back into that thing of like, that's how you sound like that. That's cool. Like, and I remember looking at the pedals going, oh fuck, I own half of those pedals, and I don't know how to sound like that. I own the same guitar. I'm just like, all right, it's just, it's not the pedals, it's not the equipment. But I always get into that of just, you find yourself lost in it. And I've been trying to protect myself from that for the last few years of just like, don't fall into that thing of how did they do this or how would I do it? Because I think some of it is like that old thing of like, oh man, this music is so fucking great. Imagine being up there and making that music. Wouldn't that be fucking
Yeah.
cool? Like it
Yeah.
is, it's the purest part. Because I think, I don't know what it's like to be somebody in the audience not thinking on some level, I'd love to be up there or I'd love to write a song that good or I'd love to connect with people. I don't know what that's like. I don't know if everyone feels like that or if that's just musicians feel like
Yeah.
that. Um, but yeah, it's a I definitely start going like, oh, where's the bass sound come from? But do you
Yeah.
ever find that if you start thinking like that and the band on stage is a laptop in it and you just start going, is that all coming from where's the bass? I don't see a bass player. Is it oh the guitarist has got it tuned down? You're like you
Yeah.
start and that really distracts you from things. What the
Yeah,
hell?
no, it's interesting too. Yeah, one thing that always gets me is when they switch guitars and I don't notice a discernible difference between
Yeah.
some.
Oh,
That's
that's
always like
yeah.
one of like, why do you need to bring out the SG for that one or whatever?
I remember, yeah, and I remember a band that I really liked had a real Telecastery kind of like fuzzy kind of sound. I'd seen them loads of times, and then they came out one time and had a big hollow body, kind of beautiful, like totally different guitar, and just launched into the usual riff or whatever, and it was just like sounds exactly. It just sounds like a Telecaster.
Yeah, I've had that experience.
Yeah, it's like how it's like yeah, how much does it matter? Oh no.
Well, I've seen one that I think it's weird is that like I've seen people switch guitars, so they have one guitar for like a distorted
Mm,
sound, then they have one for a clean sound. I'm
yeah,
like, could you not just use an effect?
yeah.
Like that was one that was like,
I think
interesting.
I think I've have that though. I used to have the like you just prefer playing a certain song on a certain
That's fair.
guitar. Like a lot of the time, I remember getting a new guitar for the last tour my band had and really wanted to play it all the time because it was an identical model. It just felt a little different, so it was fresher.
Yeah.
It was just um it was a piece of shit though. I remember I discovered halfway through the tour that it had a real problem and sounded like crap out the front.
Yeah.
So like, oh, okay.
That's the thing, man. You can absolutely go crazy with the technological side because like there's so many different guitar options, amp options, and
Yeah,
pedals. Like there's just so many different like ways of getting sound. I do think the idea sometimes I think actual financial limitations can be beneficial. I was talking age ago to a punk band called Touch Excellent. I don't know if you're aware of them, but they're in the Dublin music scene at the moment, and they were kind of saying like, yeah, a lot of it is like a lot of their sound is based on kind of the economic necessity where
yeah,
they just kind of like get secondhand pedals and whatever works works. And I think
yeah.
it's kind of it was similar actually to like Kurt Cobain and like the Bleach days of Nirvana and things like that, where a lot of that sound was just based on what he was able to get from like thrift shops and stuff like that. I think
Yeah.
there is kind of like a beauty and limitation just in the sense of, well, that's your sound and you have to kind of write with it.
Well, that
You can't just Brian Wilson it.
but that's the thing. Like that was like the hip hop. thing of like 808s failed and ended up in charity shops. So
Yeah.
that's how the 808 became, so people could afford them. So that
Yeah.
became the instrument that you could use. I remember I found that fascinating because like who is crying out for a drum machine like in 1917? It's interesting, but there's only like 1,000 people in the world who can afford it and want one.
Yeah.
So that's it. Like so if you make 5,000 of them, there's going to be 4,000 out there somewhere randomly being around. And I did that at the start of this album. I remember thinking like when I was writing songs for the band, I would always limit myself to guitar, bass, and drums. There can't be anything else, and there can only be two harmony lines for the other two guys in the band. Like so. I would
Yeah.
actually write all those parts. I wouldn't put a keyboard part in there or something like that because we couldn't play that live. So it was very good that way. But this one, I made up a list of all the. I didn't want to be totally open. I wanted to be more open. But I made a list of all the instruments that I wanted to have on the album, and I stuck to that, and it was really interesting. Like there's electric guitar on like three of the songs, and it's like that's an accident. There
Yeah.
shouldn't have been an electric guitar. That doesn't really fit the aesthetic of the album. But the rest of the thing is that like it's all based around acoustic guitar, Rhodes piano, and one synth, which I
Mhm.
didn't really know how to use. So it's got like one sound on it. But it's like everything. So if you want a sound on there, like there's one of the songs is like I really want a horn section on this, but can't have a horn section. So what'll I do it with? And trying to figure out how to do a sound with a guitar and a synth and make it sound weird. And you end up in another area where it sounds way better than a horn section would have sounded.
Mhm.
And I,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that sort of stuff where you've got limitations is great. And to be honest, when I was in the band, I was unemployed, could not afford. I remember driving around a corner and my amp falling and
Yeah.
I'm just being destroyed. And it meant that I had to spend the few hundred quid that I was trying to save up for something on a new amp, like the beautiful new amp. But it was like I knew as soon as I heard that thing fall, I was like, that's not fixable, and that's
Yeah.
not, and that's going to affect the sound of the band.
Yeah.
Like,
No, because there is always that crapshoot of like, well, maybe I could bring it somewhere to get fixed, but then you're
yeah,
probably just gonna be as equally out of pockets, and it always weird. It's weird. I don't know if you feel this way too. But I often find when equipment gets repaired, there's always a bit of doubt in my mind where I'm like, well, is this
yeah,
is this
you're no
actually happening?
longer. Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
it's. I used to have a thing of buying rare pedals for my guitar, and I remember thinking, actually, I should use really stock kind of things that are really easy to replace because
Yeah.
if I'm, that's why I started using the microKORG a bit. It was like everybody uses the microKORG, but if you use a special synthy kind of thing that you can't replace, you're
Yeah.
screwed. And I have like
That's a good point.
the same with drum machines and stuff like that is like that I use, and it's like I want to have something that I can buy in. If it all goes wrong, I can buy in another one.
Yeah.
Like I don't want the 70s drum machine to be out with me, not
Yeah.
that I could afford one of them either.
Did you find actually when you went to Abbey Road, you were kind of mentioning there, did you find that the sonic limitations actually opened up? Was there equipment there that was available to you, or was it kind of just a matter of like, no, we're going to stick where the equipment we're used to?
No, it was basically going over there to master the album. So
Oh, sorry. So the album's already been recorded. Sorry.
yeah, so you're kind of like you're done with it, but you're kind of like you're kind of putting because I mixed everything
Sure.
as well. So I was like handing it over to the mastering engineer, and you don't know what the mastering engineer is doing because a lot of people have a lot of opinions about mastering. I find it's great, and it's
Yeah.
great, especially when you've done all the work. It's great to have somebody else who knows what they're doing. Come on, and,
It's
and
also
do
nice
it.
to have that kind of outsider listener too.
It is. What's weird though is like mastering is relatively quick. It's not. You always think it's going to take a few days, but even like any album you've ever heard is like an afternoon's work usually for somebody. So it's like, what was it like to master Odelay by Beck? Like, I just can't remember because it was. I did three albums that day. Um, it was an interesting thing going over for it. I remember talking to the mastering engineer, and he was going like, uh, "It's like you don't really need to come in if you don't want to. Like I can just do the
Yeah.
work and send it to you." And I was like, "Well, I am coming over to do this," and I explained to him like it's kind of a deadline. He's like, "No problem. I'll give you the VIP treatment. Like yeah, make
Yeah.
it come along and we'll sit down and work on it. Like it was just you be in Abbey Road. You'll have the whole experience." And I was like, it was great. But it was like I was going in there at like 11. I was leaving at 2. You
Oh,
know?
really? It was,
Yeah.
I actually don't know. Like, I've never had that mastered, so I don't know like how long that
Well,
process was.
there's a lot of stuff I've become decent enough at mixing and stuff like that. So what I've often found is like if there's problems to fix, it takes a while.
Yeah.
But I went there with my laptop and a interface and stuff, and I was actually fixing it. There was one or two little things where like kick drum is just not working. He was like, I could work on that for like 2 hours, or you could open that up and just turn up the kick and give it back to me. And I was like, we'll do that. That sounds good. But yeah, it's a weird process, but essentially what I view mastering as is just making sure that this thing sounds as good as possible on everybody's stereo or on everybody's
Yeah.
headphones. Just doing a pass and the fresh ears coming in and educated ears coming and experienced ears coming in and going, mm, let's tidy that bit up. Let's tidy that bit up. And it's like, that's great. Um, but man, it was nerve wracking going in and what if it's terrible? What if he goes, I can't work with this shit.
I remember that actually. Yeah, I remember hearing when Joy Division were making Unknown Pleasures. One of the requisites that Tony Wilson had was that we have to actually listen to it on the best sound system, and we have to find like the crappiest sound system
Yeah,
we can. And if it has the sonic fidelity in all of them, then that's how you know you're done. Kind of.
yeah.
I think that's a good premise.
But it also goes back to the thing we're talking about deadlines and stuff. Is that like how would you ever be finished if you had to test it on every single possible type of thing? And I
Yeah.
at some point I went, right, these are the three things I'm going to listen to it on, and
Yeah.
believe it. I listened to it in the car, and our car has no aux in. We just kind of like
Mhm.
have this little machine that kind of beams it into like it's a radio, like almost
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
radio broadcaster. So you've just got this underlying static. I'm listening to the album going like, yeah, the audio fidelity is certainly good enough. But it sounded good on that. But it was like I was like, this can't be a test. This car stereo test isn't working.
I'll tell you, you should try driving up to the mountains where, when
Oh
it
God.
starts like cutting out and stuff like that. That's why you
Yeah.
should really try
That's what I was
it.
I was listening to it on the way down to Sligo, and it was like suddenly a more powerful radio station. I came over a hill and a more
Oh
powerful
no.
radio station just cuts it. Like, oh God.
Getting jump scared by like
Yeah,
daytime
exactly.
radio.
Yeah.
Um, I'll try and take too much of your time. I just want to
Yeah.
ask actually a little bit about kind of like one thing I noted actually listening to the album full, and this was something I noted actually when I was listening to your singles kind of in isolation, but
Mm.
collectively, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But now actually listen to it as a complete whole piece. There's a lot of different variation in the songs and in the sounds and in the influences. Again, was that something where you wanted that kind of versatility, or was that just organically you were writing the songs, they became what they became, and then when put together, there was kind of a strong continuity between them?
I, it's hard to for the reason of like because it's hard to tell for me because I definitely I think the worst thing I could have done was like there was a bunch of sorry, I'm not finishing any sentences, but there's a bunch
That's
of
fine.
influences like conscious influence like Prince and Beck and there was a bit of Talking Heads and stuff and but at no stage did I ever like try to sound like that. It was kind of like you jumping off points and then just following the song and following the sounds. Like you turn on something and the guitar sounds kind of cool today. Well, let's record it that
Yeah,
way. It's like what? How was it sounding? I was like, I've no idea what I did to make it sound like that, but it sounds really good.
yeah,
And so it was a lot of kind of there was this kind of a barometer in my head for all the songs of like, is that hitting? Does that feel like me? Does that feel true to what I want it to be? So like Old Loves is a really interesting song because that's very different. I think that's very different to the rest of the songs. I think it's a slow, quiet song. And when I listen back to it, like it's not. It's fast, it's
yeah,
faster, it's not quiet, and it's also there's a quiet bit in it. But in my head, that's a slow, quiet song. And so I was like placing that on the album, going, oh, you better put it in between two, maybe louder ones or something, like
yeah,
give it a break. And then I listened back to it in one sitting, and it's like there isn't a quiet song until very near close to the end. It's like that's oh right, so it's different from how it is in my head.
yeah,
And I think the ultimate thing is like it's not a conscious thing, but I think that album is very me. And what it was interesting, the barometer of like, is this good enough to make it onto the album? There's one of the songs that nearly fell off the album right at the end, and it's still on
okay.
there. And I won't mention which one it is because it wouldn't be fair to it. But,
You love all your songs equally.
yes, exactly. It's my voice. Terrible. Um, but that was the interesting thing is that like I don't know how to describe like the difference. For me, it all sounds kind of like more or less the same kind of thing. And
Mhm.
then some people point out that there's a lot of breath in there, or there's a lot of like different influences. I'm like, is there? Okay, what are the different influences? Yeah, it's only in kind of like I'm really looking forward to hearing people, talk to me about those things because it's like cool. I can't hear it that way, so it's interesting.
No, it is
Uh,
good to get a outsider's perspective on your art, I think.
Yeah,
Even if it's negative, I don't know, do you find there's any merit to negativity even?
I've never had negative reviews. I don't
That's
understand
good.
what you're
That's
saying.
good.
No, yeah, I do. I think the problem is seeing it as like people call it feedback, and I'm a designer by trade, right? So
Mhm.
feedback is part of your process where you are actually the most mature design process is one that incorporates feedback rather than shies away from it because
Right.
the worst thing is to hold it all here. I think with music and with more art based things like that, that idea of what other people think, you need to, it's really useful to hear it because sometimes you can use it to go, that's interesting, that's different than I thought. But if you reacted to it as if it was input that you need to listen to, I think that's a negative part because you can
Yes.
lose your confidence in something. I would say I'm not going to get glowing reviews for this album. I'm sure there's going to be people who pick it apart. That's always like going to happen. But for
I wasn't gonna
me,
go that far.
oh no, you can. But I would say the big one for me is like how I've mentioned I felt kind of confident about it. It feels like what I set out to achieve, which is a coherent like statement. It's consistent. It goes further than I thought it would in some ways. It's very honest to who I am. It's a record I think I would like if I wasn't me,
Yeah.
but it's like any feedback beyond that is interesting rather than like I'm going to do anything about it. So it's like it's going to be hearing what people think, hearing reviews and stuff like that is going to be interesting because I can't, I think it's really, really good, but
Yeah.
it's individual and I know it doesn't fit into like, what people are looking for. So it's like, okay, let's hear it.
Well, one of the things I think is really great too is that you were kind of mentioned the kind of sort of personal element to the
Mm,
album and how it really feels like your thing. And one thing that I think is really cool is that it doesn't have the kind of pressures of kind of traditional major label kind of
mm,
requirements and ideas for radio play because there's plenty of songs in this record that I think would just make for absolutely like you could fit in with like the top 40 on the radio and it would just
mm.
sound like completely in line. But then I'm also thinking like a song like "She's Got Me All Fucked Up Now," like that melody like just gets stuck in my head all the time every time I hear it. But I can imagine like a studio pressuring you to make like a radio edit. It's like she got
Yeah.
me all messed up now or something like
That's it.
that.
That's the one I tried. I tried
Yeah.
two radio edits of that. One
Oh,
was
really?
mess. It's like nope, doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
And the other one was just muting the word fuck, and
Right.
it was like nope, doesn't work either. Like it's like it literally doesn't work. And that was yeah, but that's the funny thing is that like I am never going to be in a position where I'm being being hounded by a label you need to
Well,
clean up
that's
your
good.
stuff, man. But it's what's interesting about it is like that song like all fucked up now is the most poppy, catchy thing in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and can't be. Like it's like, and
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of thing where before I remember recording a radio edit of one of our singles and taking out the word fuck and not liking taking it out and not liking it was an internal rhyme in a in a
Yeah.
in a line and not liking that. And now it feels like the radio version feels better than the other version. And I think that's really important sometimes. That's a really cool bit of getting somebody else's input. And it was working with the producer who kind of pulled out a song I wouldn't have picked as a single and just went, we should do a radio version of that. That should be the single. And it wasn't his place really to tell us what to release, but
Yeah.
it was very cool that he did that because it galvanized us around the song. But the effort around actually making that radio friendly was like a really interesting education because it was like, yeah, we need it to pump a little bit more. And it's
Yeah.
actually I did Let Us Be. I released a single like there, and the single's quite different from the album version because I had to make it the album version like 5.5 minutes long because it's a fun circular groove that I think works in a long form, and I think on an album it works, and live it works to a certain extent. But like I had to shorten it, and it was really interesting. I came up with a different arrangement to shorten it, and now I'm listening to it going, oh, like maybe the shortened version, So
Your
I
work is never done.
but it's really fun to try and if somebody says to you, "Here's that song that you love," can you get it under 3 minutes or can you get it in 3.5? That's a fun challenge
Yeah.
to do because you're not compromising the song to try and do that. If there's something happening that you don't want to compromise, just don't. You just do it. But it didn't result in much radio. Well, sorry, that got more radio play than any of the other singles, so that's good. But yeah,
I'm picturing you know the way every year, every Christmas, there's always a debate about radio censoring Fairy Tale New York because there's
yeah,
a homophobic slur in it. I imagine
yeah,
All Fucked Up Now becomes that new version of it. It's like, well,
perfect.
you
Yeah,
can censor fucking every other song except
yeah.
this. This has to be an exception.
What was there's a David Letterman thing of like they had somebody said the word asshole on his thing and they could censor the word ass or the word hole.
Oh
And
yeah.
they had to figure out which one. And they're having a serious conversation debating it. And I just love that idea of like, so which you can only have three fucks in the song.
It's the same thing actually in American television. It's so funny to me. God damn it. You can say damn it, but you can't say
Yeah.
God damn it. And I
Oh,
just think
my
that's so
God.
funny. It's like if you say God damn it on like morning television over here, no
It's
one would even
normal.
notice.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
But I think it's really funny because then I watch like American television and they'll say every now and again they'll say a word like bollocks or wanker and I'm like, well,
Yeah,
that would get censored here, you
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I guess I guess I'll just wrap up sir by asking like
Hmm.
obviously now the album's coming out February 20th if I'm correct. This will be
Yep.
out by it'll be out by the time this is up. But I was gonna ask like now having spent all this time toiling away and I think you've made it very apparent. I mean just how kind of how long kind of I don't want to say the word arduous, but you know like because that
Sorry, all I've done is just took too long, Aaron. There's too much work. Yeah,
Well, no, I mean, like crafting it, you know, you
yeah.
want it to be perfect. You want to make the Sistine Chapel, you know, um, and I think it like you know, for whatever my opinion's worth, I do think like you know, it has worked out. I mean, it is a great album, and I think it will be a favorite of people. I do not see it
Hmm.
getting picked apart like vultures on a corpse, but
I'm gonna quote you on that now.
absolutely, yeah.
That's the album. That's the cover quote. I
Imagine, yeah,
can't
imagine
see
if
this.
album covers were like movie
Yeah,
posters
I
where it's
can't
just
see
like
this getting picked apart by vultures. Ooh.
you'll probably do okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But when it comes to yeah, when it comes to kind of like actually just sitting back now and having the final thing released, quite literally, I mean, you have the vinyl right there,
Yeah.
um, which I know you're kind of going to just like rip open
Yeah.
like Christmas morning. Um, um, do you kind of then go, is there a sense of relief going like, okay, that's complete and I have that finished, or is there kind of sense of dread going, well, what's next?
Not really. I'm excited about what's next because to be honest, this was a project. Like I honestly didn't set out to kind of like I'm gonna have a solo career. I actually set out to make an album because as good as my first album was, and a lot of people like it, it wasn't what I wanted it to be in a lot of ways. Like I think it's really, really good, but it's a collection of songs, and I'm an album person. I love when
Yeah.
albums hang together. This is a collection of songs as well, but it's like I feel this is much. I feel like I achieved what I set out to achieve. Very different from what I thought it would be, but it's like it is the thing that I wanted to create. What's interesting now is like the only way people will listen to this if I'm actually out there playing and trying to get new pairs of ears, every now and again. And I have our live show is like there's a bunch of songs in there that aren't on the album,
Hmm.
and I counted it up. I've got the next album written basically, like accidentally. I've got the next thing together, and it's like that's interesting. But I kind of want to. I don't want to rush into recording that, and I kind of want to take writing. But I know there's going to be a second one, and that might be something that is like just slipped out onto Spotify at some point, or it might be the same kind of arduous, climb up the mountain kind of thing like this. But I feel that going back to that confidence thing that I have, it's like I feel a huge sense of confidence in completing this, and it's given me a feeling like I can't really control if people like it. I can't control if people hear it beyond, working hard on it and
Right.
things like that. But I'm interested to see what the next one is like, and I can control whether I do that or not. And the skills that I've learned in making this one, I'm interested in seeing where I end up the next one. In some ways, I'd love to go, in the opposite direction or just, do something completely different. But I kind of like the idea of making another one and making
Yeah.
another one after that. And I know that a lot of people, when they get to the thing, are like, "Oh God, I couldn't go back in the studio, or I couldn't do this." And I'm like, it's given me a lot, given me a bit of a hunger to make another one. And partially because it's been this albatross around my neck for 10 years. And it hasn't been working for 10 years. It's been sporadic bursts over 10 years
Right.
and then a solid effort for the last year or two. But it's like, I learned so much and I loved kind of finding out stuff. And I'm really interested to see what I could do with the next one. So, like, I think that's how I'm feeling. I'm not, but what this year is going to be all about playing and doing justice to it because I think it deserves people, people to listen to it and make up their own mind. So, doing things to make sure that people listen to it is what this year will be about. Just, whether that means releasing stuff or it means like, promoting it or playing gigs, that's what this year will be about. So I'm kind of like looking forward to that and then looking at the next one. So yeah, I think
I
that's
was
it.
just gonna ask actually, just
Mm.
you were kind of mentioning like that you have songs from the potential sophomore
Yeah,
album. I
yeah.
was wondering, do
Oh
you
God,
think like
the difficult second album.
do you think like actually kind of like putting them in the set list when it comes to performing live kind of gives you a sense of the placement of the album in real time? Because
Mm,
obviously I think the one of the kind of benefits of playing live is that if say you were to play a gig consecutively every day of a
mm,
week, the set list doesn't have to be in the same order every day. You do have liberty to kind of just switch it up and change it up. Does
mm.
that kind of like interest you in terms of like trying to go, well, let's see how this song works next to this. Let's, in terms of like placement, or is it
I,
kind of just more a matter of like, well, the set list is one thing, but the track list is another.
yeah, I think it's the latter because like that's interesting though because I haven't really thought about it like that. But it's what I do now when I was in the Dead Flags, the band, our
Mhm.
live sound I think was very close to the recording sound for most of it anyway. So a live gig could be the same. I think we last gig we played the album start to finish, and it wasn't a million miles off kind of thing. How I play now is very different to the album because the album is quite lush. It's got lots of stuff on it, and it's just me on an acoustic guitar and and synths and stuff like that, and a drummer and my wife singing backing vocals, and it's like that's quite stripped down. So you have to figure out what it sounds like. But the interesting thing about that is the newer songs I feel like gravitating more towards that simpler thing. What does it need to be as opposed to hey, let's try out everything
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
but that I might take that as an idea to see how the track listing
Absolutely.
goes.
Have at
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
It's not my original idea
yeah.
anyway,
And it's
so
no, but it's a cool. I think it's a cool idea, but also the idea of live albums, and
yeah.
I think live teaches you what the songs are, like the strengths of the song,
Yeah,
because
that's a good point. Yeah.
yeah, the core of the song live, like it should be able to work in a very stripped down way. So
Yeah, I think
it's
I think people should like record their live gigs. I mean, I've
yeah,
seen certain bands just like recording live sets because they don't have any recordings out and they're just using it to get gigs.
yeah,
Because obviously, like if you're working with promoters and venues, they want to know what you
yeah,
sound like. So I've seen that as like an avenue in terms of just getting people booked basically. And
yeah.
I think it's like, but I think it's good to have that, even if it's like, it's just something I've always been frustrated at. Like, and I don't want to go on a rant about this, but like, I remember like years ago, in the 70s and 80s in particular, bootlegging kind of became a big thing. And,
Mm,
but they would destroy, like, especially Led Zeppelin's manager, I forget his name off the top of my head, but he was like,
yeah,
vehemently go after the bootleggers because their argument was that it was stealing revenue from the band. But I never thought that. I mean,
yeah.
I think that's like a documentation of each gig because gigs are kind of an ephemeral thing. You go and you're there
That's
for
it.
an hour
Yeah,
and a half, and then it's over. But if you have that recording, it persists long after the band is gone, long after members have
yeah.
died, long after lineup changes and all this. And it's great to, I think, have that documentation. It's so sad that I think so many people viewed it as
There's
competing because I thought if you heard a good song on a
yeah, you'd
bootleg,
want to yeah.
it incentivizes you to buy a record. You know what I
And
mean?
that's most of my Napster days were downloading kind of bootlegs of songs that
Mm.
hadn't been released yet by, remember the Frames, getting
Yeah,
into like going along to a gig and hearing and knowing every word of the song that hadn't been recorded yet.
yeah, it's great.
Amazing. But I suppose I will leave you with this thing, which is that the I went to New York last year to go, or no, 2 years ago, because when stuff opened up after the pandemic, myself and
Hmm.
my wife started asking ourselves like, what would we do if we weren't locked down, if we didn't. And we said we'd go and see American Utopia by David Byrne because we'd been to see that gig. It was one of the best gigs I've ever been at, and it was in Dublin. and he had just done reopened on Broadway, doing like just 100 gigs in a row on Broadway. And we went to see it, and it was the greatest musical experience I've ever had. Was that second time I burst out crying in the first like minute of it, because it was just so special. And it's this thing of like, it was on Broadway the whole time, but it was so live and so immediate, and it was so special to have caught it the second time, kind of thing. And we were like almost seriously considering going to see it the next night and stuff. And Spike Lee filmed the gig, and it is such a special show. But like Stop Making Sense, it doesn't exist anymore. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
but it does exist as the film, but the film gets quite close to what it was like in real life and gives you a sense of it. And I always think, like, if you're doing something special, like David Byrne does a special tour. He did a thing with St. Vincent a few years ago as well. It was amazing. But it's like capturing that a little bit. It's getting 80% of it or something. That's really important. And that's more, there's a lot of visuals to that, but the live show can be more special than the album. And that's a really good example of one where the album is very good, but the live album and the live film are something like mind blowing and really emotional and stuff. And it's like, I think they can be just as important. And it's like, it's important to keep it ephemeral, I think, but it's also, you can capture a little sense of it. It's really good.
Yeah, I think like with Stop Making Sense, what's interesting too is that was recorded and like most concert films, are actually recorded over multiple
a
nights,
few
but
nights,
there's a weird continuity. Like when you watch it, you just don't notice. It feels
it's
so
astonishing. Yeah. But can you imagine actually seeing that show?
I
It would have been different to be there though as well.
I know.
Well, look, thank you very much, Aaron. I'm gonna have to get along to a thing here, but
Oh, no worries, no worries.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and I will be listening to this test pressing and praying that everything's fine.
You're ditching me early to listen.
No,
no.
no.
No, I'm joking.
Yeah. It's a good thing to be ditched for. Okay.
That's fine. It's fine. You gotta set your parameters. I guess the final thing, just one. Final thing I'll just ask is, you mentioned plans for the year. Any gigs, any festivals people should be on the lookout for, or is it kind of up in the air at the moment?
Yeah, we're going to be playing Whelan's on the 1st of April, and going to be doing a bunch of shows around that. In terms of other things, like we'll hopefully announce a bunch of things during in the next few months, but the main thing is a bit of an album tour in March and April around the place. So I just want to get out there and play. So it'll be fun. Yeah,
pop along to those.
That. Yes, I'll hopefully see you on that. That'll be cool.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Billy.
Right, thank you. See you.
Bye. Thank you for listening to that episode of Post-Burnout.com interviews. We're an independent venture run by yours truly, and as I said at the beginning, liking, rating, subscribing and sharing really helps us out a lot. If you're feeling extra generous, we do have a PayPal donation link in the episode description, but don't feel obligated, of course. We've also begun releasing occasional exclusive episodes on Spotify, so subscribe there if you'd be interested in hearing those. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.